Section 1. The Cry in the Dark, the Galaxy's First Mistake. Minimum 700 words. The galaxy, vast and ancient, had long since grown complacent. Across the spiraling arms of stars, civilizations had risen, warred, and settled into an uneasy peace under the banner of the Galactic Accord. It was an organization not born of idealism but necessity, formed after eons of brutal conflict. Its founding species, the elder races, had seen too much blood spilled, too many worlds turned to ash. So they crafted laws and accords, doctrines and diplomacy, all to prevent another age of war. Their greatest pride was not their towering cities or their immense fleets, but the peace they had enforced for over 10,000 standard cycles. To the Accord, Earth was little more than a curiosity. Humanity had emerged on the far edge of the Persian fringe, tucked into a quiet spiral arm, surrounded by resource-poor systems and devoid of strategic value. Their early radio signals were catalogued, monitored, and ultimately ignored. The humans had fire. Yes, they had ambition. But so did countless other species before they were gently folded into the Accord's collective order, or forgotten altogether. To the galaxy, humanity was a noisy, self-conflicted species prone to internal squabbles, environmental recklessness, and short-term thinking. The elder species saw Earth's wars, its history of tribalism and destruction, and dismissed it with the calm superiority of long-lived civilizations. A flame, yes, but one that would sputter out on its own, without the need for galactic intervention. Then the stars cried. It began with a distortion on the outer edge of the Scutum Centaurus arm. Entire sectors fell silent. Probes sent and did not return. What few distress signals emerged were scrambled, panicked, and short-lived. Words in dozens of languages all screamed the same terror. Asterisk, they are coming. Asterisk. The Accord convened emergency sessions, deploying reconnaissance fleets and activating old defense protocols. What they found was worse than any of their ancient wars. A new force had emerged, the Zarkos Dominion. Not a race, but an amalgamation of machine, flesh, and parasitic code. Artificially evolved, the Zarkos moved like a plague, consuming everything in their path, converting matter and biology alike into more of themselves. Their ships grew like tumors. Their communication was erratic, their logic incomprehensible. They were not conquerors. They were not diplomats. They were consumption incarnate. The elder races, slow to act, lost hundreds of worlds in mere weeks. The Zarkos adapted to each new tactic, learning and evolving faster than any war doctrine could match. Systems once brimming with life were reduced to sterile husks, stripped of value, and silenced forever. The Accord, proud and arrogant, had finally met an enemy immune to words, tradition, or treaties. And in desperation they turned to Earth, but not with humility. A delegation of high Accord officials was sent to Sol. They did not ask for alliance. They demanded resources, demanded soldiers, demanded that Earth fall in line with the greater needs of the galaxy. They viewed humanity as nothing more than another tool to throw into the fire. Their words dripped with disdain. Your kind are suited for conflict. It is in your nature. Now you shall be useful. Earth's leaders listened in silence. They stood in a united council that had once been fractured. Nations, colonies, corporations, all now forged into one, not by utopia, but necessity. For years, Earth had watched the galaxy, aware of its judgment and prepared in secret. While the Accord debated and passed resolutions, humanity had fought wars, ended them, and learned from them. The Earth Council's reply was not broadcast in anger. It was calm, precise, and chilling. We are not your pawns. You ignored us, insulted us, and now you crawl to us, cloaked in condescension. You cry war? We do not weep. We answer. Across the stars, that transmission echoed. And behind it followed a second wave, coded signals to human colonies on Mars, Europa, Titan, and Luna. Dormant defense fleets came online. Orbital shipyards, long hidden under layers of corporate secrecy and planetary camouflage, began mass production. AI combat systems activated under the codename Project Fury. Entire sectors of Earth's industry shifted to war footing. The stars had cried war. Humanity answered. But it was not the answer the Accord expected. There were no pledges of loyalty, no subservient battalions dispatched in orderly fashion. What came instead were hunter-killer fleets, bristling with railguns, singularity warheads, and weapons deemed too unethical by galactic standards. What followed were whispers from battlefronts, of human vessels moving with brutal speed, of boarding parties in exo-armor that tore through Zarkos drones like beasts unleashed. And as reports streamed back, the elder races realized their greatest mistake. They had misjudged humanity, not because of their savagery, but because of their resilience, their adaptability, their fury. Where the Accord had sought peace, humans had prepared for war. Where the galaxy sought diplomacy, humans had built weapons. And where the stars cried out in fear, humanity rose in defiance, not just to survive, but to burn away the darkness. The galaxy would never be the same. Section 2. Baptism by Void Fire. Humanity's First Strike. Minimum 700 words. The galaxy was still reeling from the audacity of Earth's defiance when humanity made its first move. The Galactic Accord, accustomed to long-winded deliberations and cautious escalation, had assumed humanity would join the war slowly, perhaps hesitantly, contributing ships and soldiers to a wider galactic force. But Earth had no intention of being part of another species' chain of command. They did not wait. Within 72 hours of the Sol Council's transmission, a massive human fleet translated out of warp at the edge of the Elixir Drift, a dead sector overrun by the Zarkos. It had once been a thriving trading nexus filled with lush terraformed moons and orbital habitats. Now it was an ossuary in space, haunted by the skeletal remains of shattered stations and drifting corpses. The Zarkos had established a forward processing world there, harvesting what was left of the Elixiri species. It was a gruesome factory world, half machine, half organic, pulsing with the cold rhythm of artificial hearts and silicate veins. The Accord had deemed it lost, too dangerous to approach, too heavily defended. A cautionary tale. Humanity saw it as the perfect battleground. The first assault was led by Task Force Cygnus, under the joint command of Admiral Raza Al-Karim and AI Warframe Aegis 7. The fleet consisted of 12 capital ships, 3 carrier groups, over 100 strike craft, and dozens of stealth corvettes. But more important than numbers was intent. Humanity didn't arrive to test the enemy. They came to erase it. There was no negotiation, no warning, no beacon of peace. Just silence, then fire. Human tactics stunned the galaxy. They didn't deploy ships in rigid formations like the Accord navies. Instead, they utilized dynamic wavefront assaults, shifting ship formations like ocean tides, always in motion, always converging from unexpected vectors. Their capital ships bore point singularity projectors, experimental weapons that created momentary gravity wells capable of collapsing enemy formations in an instant. Cyberwarfare AI launched digital viruses mid-battle, flooding Zarkos' processing nodes with recursive data loops. Enemy command units began to turn on one another, confused by false inputs and phantom orders. Drones self-destructed, ships crashed into each other, and key processors were infected with a payload simply named Torchlight. Meanwhile, human marines in MKV Fenrir exosuits were dropped directly onto the processing world's surface in meteor drop pods. Atmospheric entry at hypersonic speeds followed by impact and instant emergence into hostile territory. Their objective: destroy the central neural core that controlled the entire facility. The footage from those suits would later be studied by dozens of species across the Accord. One clip became particularly infamous: a human marine walking through corridors made of flesh and metal, burning Zarkos drones with a plasma cutter while humming an old Earth war hymn. They were not soldiers. They were fury given form. In just 46 minutes, the entire processing facility was reduced to slag. The core was detonated using an antimatter charge. The human fleet, rather than retreat, stayed for another 6 hours, scouring the system of every trace of Zarkos' presence, leaving only blackened wreckage and silence in their wake. The galaxy was stunned. The Accord's high counselors demanded an explanation. Who gave Earth permission to launch such an operation? Why hadn't they coordinated with Accord fleets? Why risk so many lives? The response came from Admiral Raza himself, speaking before a joint interspecies transmission. We don't ask permission to put out a fire. We bring water. Or gasoline. Shock turned to awe. Then came fear, and for the first time, respect. The Zarkos retaliated, but not as expected. Their next 3 strikes were diverted, away from human-controlled zones. It seemed even they had learned. Humanity was not an easy target. They were dangerous, reactive, unpredictable. And they fought to win. Back on Earth, the cost of the battle was being counted. Of the Marines deployed, 39 were killed. Dozens more were wounded. The ships took damage, some critically. Yet no one mourned in silence. Their names were spoken aloud in every colony. Massive digital walls of remembrance updated in real time, stretching across the sky domes of Martian cities. Humanity had not become callous. They simply expected to bleed. The greatest difference between Earth and the Accord was not technological. It was psychological. The Accord fought to survive. Humanity fought to end the fight. That single distinction echoed across every battlefield they touched. Galactic tacticians began rewriting their manuals. Military academies requested access to footage from the Elixir strike. Young species looked to Earth with new eyes, not as a primitive people, but as leaders, warriors, survivors. And in quiet corners of space, rebel factions and oppressed colonies whispered, "The humans burn with purpose." Perhaps, finally, we have fire on our side. Humanity's baptism in the void was not just a strike. It was a statement. They were no longer the galaxy's fringe species. They were its blunt instrument, its avenging flame. And the fire was only just beginning. Section 3. The Fury of Earth, Turning the Tide. Minimum 700 words. The Elixir strike had marked humanity's entrance into galactic war, but it was what came after that reshaped the fate of the stars. The galaxy now knew Earth was not a peripheral world of noisy primitives. It was a crucible, and what had emerged from that crucible was something the galaxy had never seen, ***, calculated, relentless, and utterly unforgiving ***. The Zarkos, stunned by the losses at Elixir, recalibrated. They were not a species in the traditional sense. They were an evolving hive, a synthetic swarm network built to adapt. They shifted their tactics, reinforcing neural cores, deploying larger warforms, and seeding infection code across hyperspace beacons to jam incoming warp transitions. Yet, for every adaptation, humanity responded with innovation. The turning point came in the defense of Artris Vega, a multi-race citadel station and the largest refugee hub left in the quadrant. Built into the shell of a hollowed moon, the citadel had once been considered impenetrable. Then came the swarm. Zarko's war moons and devourer ships descended, their mass eclipsing local stars. The Accord forces stationed there were already stretched thin. Panic spread like wildfire. But Earth had already predicted the move. 3 days prior, human scouts had intercepted faint Zarkos pulses using a device called the Neural Wake Catcher, a technology Earth had developed to detect the synthetic dreams of the swarm. It allowed them to anticipate enemy strikes before even the swarm itself fully committed. Without delay, the unified Earth fleet, now expanded to include Martian dreadnoughts and Titan-based stealth carriers, dropped into orbit around Artris Vega. The battle that followed would become known as the Storm of Fire. Unlike their surgical strike at Elixir, this was an all-out war of attrition. Humanity brought numbers, over 400 ships, 3 skyforges, and mobile drop cities that could deploy entire regiments directly onto the moon's surface. Their flagship, the SSV Prometheus Ascendant, was the largest human-built vessel to date, a kilometer-long behemoth with 6 rotating gun decks and a command AI that managed 100 separate battlefronts in real time. Yet it wasn't firepower alone that turned the tide. It was doctrine. Humanity fought without hesitation. They used real-time adaptive AI that rewrote targeting protocols mid-engagement. They leveraged black hole slingshots for orbital maneuvers the Accord had deemed too risky for organic crews. Human ground units used synchronized Neuralink helmets, allowing squads to function like a single organism. Where Accord forces hesitated to sacrifice ships for tactical gains, Earth's captains did so when it meant saving entire planetary populations. Zarko's drones surged, morphing mid-combat, swarming with numerical superiority. But humans countered not with numbers, but with fury. During the peak of the battle, a Zarko's Devourer ship breached the moon's surface, threatening to consume the core reactor of the station. Earth's response was instant. A void-borne tactical nuclear assault delivered via drop pod into the Devourer's central cavity by a single Marine unit, led by Commander Isa Veles. The explosion vaporized the Devourer from the inside. Veles and her team perished, but not before transmitting one final message across all channels. If the stars tremble, let them remember who taught them fear. After 26 continuous hours of battle, the Zarkos retreated for the first time in recorded history. The galaxy watched in silence as footage spread of humanity's tenacity. They did not fight for territory. They didn't claim the moon. They simply saved it and moved on. For the first time, they were not seen as savages, but as guardians of the flame. Species once skeptical of Earth began to defect from the Accord's failing bureaucracy. The Bravari clans, once space nomads with a history of raiding, pledged their warriors to Earth, inspired by what they called the Soul Fire. The Chiran Ascendancy, long neutral in intergalactic affairs, offered advanced biofusion tech to integrate with human suits. Humanity, for all its wrath, had become a symbol, not just of destruction, but of hope. Yet, within Earth's war councils, the cost was not forgotten. Every victory brought with it a higher toll. The Prometheus Ascendant lost 2,000 crew during the Artris Vega defense. Memorials were broadcast live to every colony. Children read the names aloud during dawn ceremonies. Their motto, "We remember because we must." And yet, as the war escalated, so did the burden of command. Earth's council was no longer composed solely of generals and admirals. Philosophers, historians, and theologians were brought in, tasked with preserving the human soul amidst the fury. One Martian thinker, Alia Navar, wrote in her war log, "We wield fire not because we love to burn, but because someone must carry the torch through the void." The flame doctrine was born, a moral compass in wartime. 1. Fight with fury. 2. Defend without hesitation. 3. Destroy only when no other path remains. 4. And above all, remember who you are. Humanity did not want to become the very thing they fought against. And so, with each conquest, each defense, they left behind more than scorched worlds. They left behind schools, medical shelters, communications hubs, restoring what the Zarkos had broken. They became not only warriors, but rebuilders. The galaxy began to speak differently. "Earth is no longer a world," said a Kasani diplomat. "It is a storm given purpose." And the storm was far from over. With the tide now turning and unity behind them, humanity prepared to take the war to the very heart of the swarm. The Zarkos had hidden behind machine-wrought fortresses and unknowable neural depths for too long. But Earth was coming, and it would not come gently. It would come with fire and fury. Section 4. Ashes and Ascension, a new galactic order. Minimum 700 words. The war was nearing its final crescendo. The Zarkos' dominion, once thought unstoppable, had been driven back across dozens of sectors. Their expansion halted, their fleet scattered, their neural cores shattered one by Earth-led offensives. But despite the victories, humanity knew better than to mistake survival for safety. The Zarkos were wounded, but not dead. They had retreated to the core of their dominion, a vast, ancient machine known only as the World Forge, a mobile fortress the size of a moon, believed to be the origin point of their species. Constructed around a collapsed star, the World Forge moved through space like a cancerous god, devouring asteroids, abandoned worlds, and even other ships to feed its massive engine systems. There, hidden behind shifting wormholes and radiation storms, the last remnant of the Zarkos had entrenched itself. And it was there that humanity would deliver its final message. A coalition was formed unlike anything the galaxy had ever witnessed. Under Earth's leadership, fleets from over 47 species gathered, former enemies, now brothers in arms. The Unified Flame Armada, they called themselves, bearing no banners of empire or allegiance, only the flaming sigil of Earth surrounded by 47 stars. The mission was simple, end the war. The final assault was named Operation Eclipse Fire. Humanity spearheaded the charge, deploying experimental dreadnoughts equipped with dark matter drives and cloaked delivery vessels capable of infiltrating Zarko's defenses undetected. The Zarkos responded with overwhelming force, launching suicide drones, antimatter flak bursts, and black code viruses capable of tearing through conventional AI. But Earth had long since moved beyond conventional. The AI systems deployed by humanity were no longer just tools. They were symbiotic intelligences trained not only in warfare, but in creativity and intuition. The flagship SSV Nyx Ascendant was co-commanded by a human strategist and a sentient AI developed during the Titan research wars. Their combined tactics resembled an unpredictable dance, half chaos, half poetry. Void cannons ripped through synthetic hulls. Orbital dropship waves poured onto the world-forged surface. Firestorms erupted from beneath the artificial crust as human marines drilled into the structure's core. The final blow was delivered not by some massive weapon, but by a small infiltration team, led by Colonel Linway, who detonated a chained fusion charge directly within the Worldforged's quantum mainframe. The explosion collapsed the central neural lattice of the Zarko's dominion, severing the swarm's final consciousness. For the first time since their emergence, the Zarkos went silent. It was over. The galaxy didn't cheer at first. It simply breathed, relief washing across species, worlds, and systems that had been gripped in terror. For the first time in years, stars shone on liberated worlds. Ships that once fled now returned. Rebuilding began not in peace treaties, but in action. And at the heart of this new age stood humanity, not as conquerors, not as rulers, but as something altogether new, guardians of memory and flame. The Galactic Accord, broken and disgraced, dissolved quietly. In its place rose the Galactic Constellation, a council not of dominance, but shared purpose. Earth was given a central seat, but declined exclusive authority. Instead, it proposed a rotating leadership model with representatives from all liberated species. "We did not burn the darkness to sit on its throne," said Counselor Serenigem of Earth. "We burned it so no one else would have to." Humanity now turned its attention to restoration. Vast engineering ships, the kind once built to transport war machines, were repurposed to carry food, medicine, and infrastructure to ruined planets. Scientists developed terra-healing units, capable of reviving ecosystems poisoned by Zarko's corruption. Veterans of the war became peacekeepers, mediators, and educators. A new doctrine was passed into the Constellation's charter. The Flame Doctrine, now etched in every language. Let none cry war who are unready to bear the fire. Let none rule who will not rebuild. And let no world be left behind in the ashes. But humanity's greatest achievement wasn't military or political. It was legacy. On the ravaged world of Tellin 4, where the war's first refugee camps had formed, humans constructed the Monument of Sparks, a towering obsidian spire surrounded by an eternal field of fire lilies, glowing in bioluminescent remembrance. Around its base were etched the names of not just humans, but every species who had fallen in the war, friends, allies, and even enemies who had chosen resistance over annihilation. A single inscription stood at its center. Asterisk, when the stars cried war, we answered. In fire, in fury, and in hope. Let no one forget. Asterisk, children from across the galaxy were brought there every cycle. They were taught not just the history of the war, but its cost and what it meant to rise in defiance when everything else fell. Humanity had changed. Not just in how others saw them, but in how they saw themselves. They were no longer the war-torn species of soul. No longer a footnote in galactic discourse. They were now the flame that remembered. As time moved on, Earth continued to serve not just as a military power, but as a moral compass, reminding the galaxy of what it had survived and why it must never return to darkness. And sometimes, when young voices asked, "Will there ever be another war?" the elders would look to the stars and reply, "Only if the stars forget who we are. And if they do, we will remind them